everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today we have a celebrity guest on the show. Before I announce him, though, I gotta remind you, please hit the like and subscribe button. We all work for an algorithm, whether you know it or not. So the celebrity in the house is Mr. Jon DiMaggio today. And for most of you in the cybersecurity world, must know him. But for those of you who are not in that world, you should know he has a long, illustrious history in the field of cybersecurity. He is the Chief Security Strategist at Analyst One, over 15 years of experience tracking cyber threats. Some of you might know him from infiltrating the LockBit ransomware gang during a 2-year undercover operation. Some of you may know him from Ransomware Diaries, which volumes 1 through 6 that he's written. Others may know him from the Art of Cyber Warfare. So Jon is very well published. He's also appeared on multitude of television episodes from 60 Minutes. He's been in the New York Times and has been in Wired. He's a frequent speaker at RSA. We're just very honored to have someone of his caliber on the show. Thank you so much, Jon, for joining today.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate you.
Hey, let's start off a little bit with a brief bit about your origin story, because everyone's going to know how did Jon become Jon?
Yeah, it's been a long journey. I started out right out of high school, didn't barely get out of high school. I had a cumulative GPA of 1.9, not proud of, but I barely got out. So I knew college wasn't my thing at the time. So I went in the military. I joined the Army and I became a military policeman. I got involved in various things, and I was really lucky and had the opportunity to work with the criminal investigation division, where I got to actually do some undercover work, which at that young age most people never experience, let alone in your early 20s. So got a lot of really cool experience of doing undercover work right off the bat. When I left the military, I thought I was going to go become a police officer or maybe join the FBI or something like that. It didn't work out at the time, at least where I had lived at the time. You couldn't have visible tattoos. This was like in the early 2000s. Couldn't get a job anywhere. And with the FBI, because I had smoked weed in high school, they had a zero tolerance. So I found myself having
But
to.
you didn't inhale, Jon.
That's right.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Go ahead.
The polygraph said otherwise. Anyway, so I had to really, put my ego aside. I ended up pushing carts in at Home Depot and having to like rent a room in a really crappy house, and it just wasn't a fun life. But it's what I had. So I used my GI Bill, took a bunch of IT certifications. The .com bubble had popped, so I was buying servers and routers for pennies on the dollar and built a home lab. Learned all this stuff and got a job doing on an IT help desk, doing network security and resetting passwords and all that. And they gave me a clearance. And that opened the door for me to sort of progress in my career. But I was on the engineering side for a number of years. And as a hobby, I started writing an OSINT blog, just made my own website and started writing an OSINT blog. And that got me both good and bad attention from criminals. Bad from the FBI. They weren't happy I interfered in one of their investigations unintentionally, but it also led to me getting recruited to work for the government, and I went off to work as an intelligence analyst for one of the intel agencies. I ended up specializing in espionage. I was a signals intelligence analyst as well. And in 2014, I just found it was a time you had Sony got hit by North Korea. A lot of the big banks were getting hit by Iran. And I had this expertise. So I decided to test the waters and jump into the private sector. I went to Symantec. I was on what's called the attack investigation team. And I worked with some of the smartest and brightest people who I credit a lot of my knowledge to for where I am today. But we also focused on espionage, did that for 7 years. And in 2020, I came to Analyst One. Interestingly enough, when I came to Analyst One, I had no data. So at Symantec, had an ungodly amount of data. The government, I had secret squirrel tools. Symantec, I just had me and a laptop. So I kind of had to reinvent myself. And ransomware was a huge problem. Yep. And I've realized these guys were out on the internet. They were accessible on the dark web. All victims had to talk with their attacker, so I figured I could talk to these guys too, and that's sort of what led to where I am today.
Now, very interesting. So, a few things here. One, you mentioned you had a 1.9 GPA. Now, I got to bring that up because with all the news about best and the brightest have come from elite universities and elite programs, in the world of cybersecurity, I haven't really always found that to be a consistent case. The talents are broad. So, what would you say about someone listening right now that says, well, man, I didn't go to MIT. I'm not getting into Stanford. And I do want to go work in the signals world, you know?
Yeah, what I would say is certainly there are some brilliant people that come from a strong academic background. However, some of the greatest researchers I know come from being poor, hungry, and creative. I'll tell you, not having food on the table will drive you to want to be the best that you can be and excel in your field. And that's what pushed me is having a hard life and just wanting it.
That can't be taught.
You're right. It can't be taught, and it's not a fun lesson to learn. Obviously, going through, the academic route and having, a supportive family and having a university that teaches you all these things is a much, I don't want to say easier, different, but a much nicer lifestyle to live. And I did eventually go to school, but it was Strayer online, and I did that in my 30s, and I did that because I had to get a degree. And I'm not crapping at all on universities. I have learning disabilities. I'm really bad at academic education. So for me, that wasn't an option. But being self-taught, that's how I learn, and that's what I did. But it's that drive, spending your nights and weekends doing it. My friends were watching football and drinking beer, and I was studying books and teaching myself how to do things.
I think that's inspirational because we have even in our own business found that some of the brightest people can come from places that you would least expect, high schools, right?
Agree.
Right? Because it comes down to what you were saying. I mean, fundamentally, if you have the will and the desire and the interest, the competence will come.
I was working with another researcher, and he was doing real world stuff with ransomware gangs and writing blogs and doing crazy stuff. I found out he was 17 years old, and that meant when he first started, he was 14. I can't get my kids off the couch to put the video game controller down, and this kid's taking on real world criminals. So there are definitely a lot of smart young people out there, and we need that. We need creative, motivated people,
Yeah.
regardless of age. But I found that very motivating to see a young person who was so skilled, motivated, and hungry to get out there and do this
You know,
stuff.
I I want to make sure that, for our audience, they understand. Don't put a roadblock up that isn't really there. Uh, you
Right.
know, the question is, do you have the will to really, if you really want it, you're going to be able to do it. I guess that could apply for anything pretty much too, though, but not
It
just
it does. I do want to say there are some downfalls. Like I have peers that are much smarter than I am when it comes to engineering and math and programming and things like that. And that's I'm a product of my environment to where I am. So there are definitely a lot of upsides for having that more well-rounded education. But you take what you have and you make the most out of it, and you don't stop to get where you want to go. And I'm a big believer in that. If you don't let your career drive you, you drive your career. You don't take a job just because it's offered if that's not the job that you want or where you want to be. If someone is better than you, you don't get jealous. You work harder to make yourself better. And I'm a big believer in that.
well, there you go. There, it's worth the price of admission of this. But please, everyone, continue to listen to the end. So, another question for you in that then is, if we took, and we're going to, everyone says don't generalize, but we're about to generalize. So, if we take the entire world of cybersecurity and broke it up into skill sets being technical know-how, human intelligence. So understanding a human being and the psychology of a human being is what I'll put into that umbrella. Understanding the world of business and how people make money in what they do. Um, if we were just to put those three things there, what proportionality would you give that you need to have to be successful in the world of cybersecurity for each one of those three?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. I'm going to say you need to have at least 50% needs to be education, because at the end of the day, whether you're self-taught or you go to university, you have to understand how things work if you're going to understand how things can get broken into to protect them and prevent that from happening. You need to be able to understand what hackers do and why it worked. So you have to be educated on the technical mechanics of technology, especially in the security industry. Having said that, the other side, I would say it's 30% business, because you need to know how to market yourself. You need to understand how to develop teams and how to make money out of it. I'll use myself as an example. That's an area I'm not as good at, and I've had a ton of attention over the past couple of years. And if I was really good at it, I'd be running my own company, making millions of dollars. But I have a love for what I do, and sometimes that and making business decisions don't always go together. But the last phase, I would say 20% would be the human aspect, because at the end of the day, you're working with people. The criminals are people. That's who you're really protecting, is people. It's just the technical means are what's in between them. So understanding people, having empathy for victims, understanding an attacker and their motivations, and then understanding your team, the people around you, even the ones you don't like. Understanding them is going to make it easier to work with them. So I think you hit it on the mark that you have to have a little bit of all of that. But that would be my off the cuff breakup of
Hey,
percentages for that.
I think that's very, very good insight. And it goes directly into then how did you infiltrate a gang? So when we and share what you can, but really when we think about infiltration, I'm thinking most people are listening to that show Law and Order Special Victims, where they get an
Right.
undercover guy that's sneaking into a gang and trying to figure out how to do it. How do you get into actors or get befriend actors that really are not even in your neighborhood? They're not.
Yeah, well, so in that instance, so the lockbit infiltration, in that I did do undercover covert work where I did develop online personas and pretend to be other people. What I began by just learning where these bad guys lived on the dark web, where they did their business, where they talked with friends, and I gained access to those resources. And I just spent a lot of time studying them, mapping out and documenting who they talked to, what that other person's role was. Is this a business associate? Are they selling them attack resources? Is this their friend? Is this competition? And then I learned as much as I could about them by knowing who it is that they had in their circles. So I used that sort of against them, and I tried to join their ransomware gang when they began recruiting. Of course, I know a lot about hacking, but I don't actually do it, so I could only get so far, and I knew that, but I figured I could probably learn a lot by doing this. And it's almost like an interview process. I went through this communicating with the leader of LockBit. And at the end, I didn't make the cut, but I presented myself as this younger person, really eager to get into the criminal ransomware scene. And we had a language barrier. And sounds crazy. I was shocked that it worked, but here's what I did. I knew that they didn't, because I profiled them. I knew that their primary language was Russian and they spoke a little bit of broken English. So I talked to them in German. And of course, they didn't understand German. So I suggested we just speak in broken English rather than have to use translators. And then I just had to make sure I didn't do English too well, and that worked, and we were able to communicate. Then I wrote my report. It went public, and they knew who I was. I thought that was where the story ended. But they started using my picture as their avatar on some of these dark web
Oh
forums.
man.
So I'm like, well, they know who I am. I got nothing to lose. I might as well reach back out to them as myself. And I did that. And I was expecting it to go poorly, but it didn't. You know, they were like, "I love you, you best researcher," and we just went from there. And that's where I really got close to the leadership of the group. And for the next, the undercover part was for 6 months. The next year and a half, I talked to those guys 3, 4 times a week regularly, sometimes just joking around, sometimes talking business. But they was like this fun for them. And for me, it was like this fun cat and mouse game. They knew I was chasing them. They knew I was going to write. And it was just that this back and forth of control almost to see who could outsmart the other.
But they
But it
wanted
was
the
playful.
coverage because they could have cut off
Yeah.
communication at any point in time, right?
Well, they did. So there's two things though. It benefits us to understand them better, to get information, and sometimes to prevent attacks before they happen. But on their end, they get lots of publicity. And as strange as this is to say out loud, I have just as many fans of the series that write the Ransomware Diaries that are criminals as I do in the security industry and in law enforcement. But what would happen is, they give this stuff and they think I would only be able to that I just write what they told me. They eventually learned, but they wouldn't learn that I'm gonna dig into your friends, I'm gonna do my own research, I'm gonna do technical assessments, and I'm gonna put a big picture together. And while I didn't have every piece, I'd get enough pieces to be able to see what that picture of that puzzle is supposed to be, and that's what I would write.
Jon, give us a brief primer on what is it that these at a technical level, what are these gangs doing? What's happening at the point of execution with ransomware? What are they exploiting?
Yeah, so there's two things that they're exploiting. One obviously is the technical side, meaning they're looking for vulnerabilities. They know that large companies have a lot of infrastructure that touches the internet, and they know that it's unlikely that you're going to be able to secure all of it. You're going to have one system that's not patched that is a vulnerability that's going to allow them access. But what they also know is that even if you do, that your biggest weakness is usually the humans who work for you. It's much easier to exploit a human often than it is a technical means of exploitation. But when you have the combination of both options, it makes for a ripe space that can be exploited by an adversary or using both. And that's literally what we see. I know some ransomware guys, bad guys, that only look for vulnerable infrastructure, and I know others that completely rely on social engineering. But again, combined, that's why I feel like it's a war we're losing. I always compare ransomware to the war on drugs. We talk big, but we do little. It's a big problem, but we have a lot of areas that can be manipulated and exploited by adversaries, and they have protections in place on their own, so they try to take advantage of that.
Why can't we stop the encryption process that they put on these systems from starting?
Well, for one reason, they legitimately have some of the best hackers in the world working for some of these more prominent groups. In addition to that, they're like LockBit had like 3 years in a row where they made over $100 million a year, and they treated it like a business and they reinvested into that business. And they would literally ask the hackers who work for them, "What services do you want? What can I do to improve this program?" It reminded me of Apple the way they treated it. They reinvested into that, and they made a lot of the technical aspect of it automated to where you had this graphical point and click interface that allowed people with less technical skills to be able to compromise organizations that should have been much tougher to compromise. In addition to that, it just allowed for such a high volume of people to work for them. So when you have all these people using software that you created to help do attacks, you get many more attacks, much more money. But at the end of the day, the best criminals are the ones that know how to hack, because security companies can defeat a lot of that automated stuff. But if somebody who's really good and knows what they can do, they can go through and manipulate and create vulnerabilities and exploits and things almost as they go. It's not quite like that, but it's similar to that. They're really smart and they just need to find something to exploit.
So, Jon, what about on the other side of the house? So people at Microsoft or Oracle, or, pick a company, Palo, when these systems are being designed, is is I'm sure they're intentionally not putting vulnerabilities in the thing, right? But is there not has anyone proposed a security architecture that would make it much more ransomware deterrent, or, I don't want to say ransomware proof, but
Yeah. Yeah.
what about that? What's going on there?
Well, here's the thing, though. So yes, all the companies you just said, like Microsoft, clearly security is extremely important to them. Palo makes a lot of security software. Or Oracle. Well, we won't talk about Oracle. They just got popped last week with a pretty bad breach. So I'm not going to beat up on them. There's enough people beating up on them. But what I wanted to say is, they're companies that can do things correctly, but when you're so big and you're so large and you have this big presence, it makes it hard for you. You can't ensure that the people who are using your product keep it secure, and that's just it. You have to find this combination of accessibility, usability, and security. And the more accessible and easy to use it is, the harder it is to secure. So with that combination, you just have a lot of people who use those products, but they don't necessarily secure it the way that it should be, and that leads to opportunities from attackers. And let me just give you a quick example.
Yeah, please.
Microsoft could be, let's say they're 100. Let's just say, perfect world, they put out patches the day that something becomes available that it's known there's a vulnerability. Let's just say that that's true. Even so, that doesn't mean that all the companies that have infrastructure even know all of the infrastructure they have, let alone can put patches out quickly, because often they're worried that it might break some of their software that their customers rely on. And so what happens is they have to test it and do other things. So there are these windows where things are vulnerable. And again, I don't know the solution for that except for telling companies to get better at it, but that's easy to say, hard to do. But it just leaves for an environment where if you get caught at the wrong time, lack of better words, with your pants down, these hackers take advantage of that opportunity.
How I'll just ask it. If you can answer what you can answer, I don't know, but how does our government do it? So when you look at really military communications networks, right? I got to believe, I don't know what they are. I've never researched it.
They're not Signal.
They're not sick.
I couldn't resist. I'm
I
sorry.
mean,
I'm
you
not going
should.
to do
I
politics
was
either, but I
trying so.
couldn't
I've been trying
resist.
so hard not to go into politics on this because it's so easy to do. But
Right, right. My bad,
right,
my
but
bad.
it's okay if we go there. We go there.
It was
Um,
funny though.
it is.
My comments, not the situation.
How are those environments secured? Because you certainly don't want someone launching your weapons or compromising
Yeah.
any of those systems, right?
So those are systems that, as someone who used to work for some of those organizations, those are systems where accessibility and usability is not the primary factor. Security is. There's a reason when I worked for the government, I had to go into a facility every day and I had to go through, all these checks and bounds before I could even access a system. They put security to the forefront, and I'm not talking about like state and local government. I'm talking about your intelligence agencies, some of your more secure military programs, things like that. But even with that, you still have then defense contractors and folks who work for them that are not as secure, and that's what gets leveraged to compromise to gain access. But the point being, they're still much more secure than most of the private sector. But that's literally why they put accessibility and usability to the side, and they make security the most important thing. For example, a lot of secure networks use a thing called air gap, where a system is completely separate from other networks, or there's multiple layers of encryptions and safeguards before it can touch the internet. Things like that, that a company who's providing a service to the public, like healthcare, for example, you just can't, it's not feasible that they can do that. Well, I shouldn't say it's not feasible. It's not feasible to their business model for them to do that, because it would make it harder for everybody to use their resources. They'd make less money, and that's at the end of the day what's important to most private sector companies is money over security. That's just the world that we live in.
So you're saying in convenience versus security, convenience is always going to win in the commercial world.
It so far to this date, that's how it's gone. Yes, for the most part.
Then it will be very difficult to make a real dent in this problem. Then it is the war on
It is.
drugs. I
It literally, I wasn't kidding. That's how I really feel about it. And I'm in this deep, my life revolves around it. And it's frustrating because that's what I feel is that all these examples happen, but folks just don't learn or they don't care. One of the two.
well, let's say what has been a there hasn't been really super devastating consequences. I think there have been for small businesses. They just go out of
Yes.
business. They just go
Yeah.
out of business.
And then there's people who work there that are the real victims now that are on unemployment and have families and mortgages they can't pay.
Right. But if you've got a major bank that gets hit, or like Oracle very publicly got hit,
Yeah.
right? In the end, what's going to happen here? Look at the whole solar winds thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
So,
go ahead.
yeah, I'm just saying that what's the incentive? Like, in the end, nothing really happens. So it's inconvenient. It makes the news.
Right. And the money that they lose for a large corporation, it's it's not a lot compared to $10 million wouldn't be a lot for a company that makes $1 billion.
Right.
I'm just making these numbers up, but that's the equation why a lot of companies are willing to take that risk. I think that there needs to be there's one specific incident that really irks me, and that is the Change Healthcare incident. Change Healthcare got hacked and by a ransom group called Ransom. I'm sorry, by a group called Black Cat in March of last year. And when that happened, they extorted Change Healthcare, and the company decided to pay $22 million rather than have their customers' data leaked to the internet. I don't have a problem. I understand why companies pay. I have an opinion, but I understand why companies pay, and that's fine. However, a couple months later, the person who actually did the attack didn't get their share of the money from the Black Hat ransomware gang. So the one who did the dirty work on the keyboard didn't get his money. He had that data. He went to another group called Ransom Hub in March, and they extorted Change Healthcare again, and they paid another $22 million. In my opinion, when a company puts that's $44 million put back into the criminal ecosystem, I feel like it's irresponsible to do that. I feel like if you're going to pay a second one, then at least half of that payment should come out of the CEO's pocket. I think it's ridiculous to pay that much money to put it back. It doesn't. And you listen, hear me out on this, because
Oh,
people may
I'm
think that I'm
listening.
being aggressive. It not only does it put a target on them again and all of the patient data, which mine was in there too, all of the patient's data that got exposed, but it also puts a target on every other healthcare company. And hey, shocker, I got news for you. You pay this money, they tell you, oh, don't worry, we're going to delete it if you pay. They don't. It's still on the servers. With the LockBit thing, I know for a fact that when people would pay, their data was still on these servers. You're just paying for it not to be publicly leaked at that time. But going back to the original point, there needs to be harsher consequences. I don't want to make the victim more victims, but there are certain companies and corporations where that corporate greed gets out of control, and there needs to be someone to put them back in check to make better decisions.
Okay. So I guess I would call bullshit on the whole healthcare thing. And this is why. So hear me out on this.
Mm-hmm.
That where do they find the $22 million to pay these people? Yet I guarantee you, if you went to their CISO and said, put in a request for $22 million in improvements, they would probably flip them the
Yeah,
bird. You
yeah,
know,
they'd laugh at them, sure,
they'd
of
laugh at
course.
them. They'd say, what do you mean? We're not going to do that. So somewhere this money is there, but they're not willing to invest it in securing
Correct.
their organizations. You know, that's just
Uh,
nonsensical. It's
That's the
idiotic.
problem that I have. That's the exact problem. That's why I have such a strong emotion and feeling towards it, because if they did it twice, so it's $44 million. I promise you, if they had given the $44 million additional money to their security budget, it would be far harder for them to have been compromised to the level that they are. I mean, there's no way that that wouldn't change things. That would be so much money to spend on your security, in protecting your data, your customers' data, all of that. But now it's supporting criminals. It's someone's out there on a new yacht drinking champagne right now.
That's right. But the add to insult to injury is I think the American taxpayer probably paid for part of that 22 million,
Of
because that
course.
health system is probably getting a federal grant from set of grants from somewhere, right, for various things. And I also guarantee you they're probably a charitable organization. They're registered as a
Right.
nonprofit, right? And
Right.
every year I'm sure they complain that they don't have enough money, but yet mysteriously they find 22 million. Now,
They do. They'll
or
deny me
44.
getting they'll deny me getting my sleep medication I need to sleep at night because I've got a lot of stress and anxiety. I got to pay for that out of pocket. But they got 22 million here to drop to these criminals. So, I don't want to get, again, healthcare is a touchy subject for me
No,
because I'm
it is a
irritated,
touchy subject, but I think it's something that needs to be. I know that group, especially at the patient provider level, they don't invest much in IT systems unless
right.
a gun is put to their head or a federal grant is offered. We would have never gone to electronic medical records if the federal
Right.
government had not
They were,
insisted upon
yeah, they were one of
it.
the last industries to go to move to electronic, move things to an electronic network cyber capability. One of the last ones. It's crazy to me. Of course, they were way more secure on paper, so I mean, there's that argument too. But yeah, it's a mess for sure.
Now, is there at a practical level anything that they could do as a healthcare organization that would not be so costly, but in the worst case could bring them back online in 5-10 minutes, create a completely virtualized environment, or have a total mirror site running and you just flip over. I don't know. I'm saying these things,
Yeah,
but I'm
I mean,
asking, is there a redundancy option here that would actually be a lot less than the 44 million paid out?
um, I think the closest we could get to it, not a 10-minute fix with a switch. I think the closest we could get to it is having some sort of a backup system that would allow them, that backup system and the practices in place on what to do prior to an incident happening and how to quickly restore systems and bring things online. I don't think it could be a one for one, but you certainly could have, almost like when you see on TV where they have like, let's go to backup power. You could have a partial infrastructure. You certainly could have complete data redundancy stored offline that's secured and not accessible easily by other systems. And it would be more than 10 minutes, but it would still be a lot better than what we have today. But companies are getting a lot better at having backups. It's the reason that we see ransomware criminals stealing your data now, is because companies aren't paying as often for just data encryption, because they've gotten better at backing up their data because of this problem. So there are some good wins that we do have there, and that would be one of them.
What was your biggest revelation from the whole LockBit experience?
I think my biggest revelation was that the people behind it are humans just like you and I. They've got different backstories, if you will. But there's some of these guys I met that if it was in a bar and we were drinking a beer, I'd be having a good time with them if I didn't know that they were criminals. Not all of them, some of them. But it was sort of eye opening to me, and it kind of taught me to not judge people until I actually know a little more about them. Now, you're a criminal, but uh, understanding why they're doing these things, and understanding what drives them, or how they got to this situation in the first place, I think helps with mitigating it. And what I mean by that is you literally have to talk to these guys when they attack you. The more you understand about them, the better you're going to come out of that situation. But it also can help stop attacks, because people are listening and they're probably going to say, what if he cares? You don't need to know anything about these guys. Well, I can tell you one of the top hackers that worked for LockBit I became friends with, and he found that another team that worked for the group was about to compromise two hospitals, and he reached out to me and another researcher, and he let us know before it happened. He gave us the technical details, the IPs of the infrastructure, and it allowed us to get law enforcement involved and get that hospital to fix that, and it mitigated the attack before it happened. That is not something that happens with technical means. That happens by understanding the humans behind it and by attempting to make those relationships and convince them. I did it as myself, not as some covert thing. That would work too, of getting that information, doing it covertly. But my point is that there's some big wins here by including human intelligence with cyber threat intelligence.
That's a great story. I didn't know that. That
Yeah.
that is really cool. So, do you think that top hacker, quote unquote, showed that he had or she had a heart? Would they actually consider coming to the good side if they were paid well and give
So
up?
that hacker's name's Bastard Lord. His real name's Ivan. He's now indicted. But long before the indictment, though, I tried to. So Bastard Lord had a backstory, and I wrote about it in the Ransomware Diaries Volume 2. It was a story where I could understand what brought him to feel like he needed to make a decision to commit crimes. However, him committing crimes and continuing to do it was greed. That person, I tried very, very hard to convince him it's not worth looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. I offered, because I've got I can consider myself almost like a liaison between criminals, law enforcement, and intelligence organizations, because I have contacts in all of them. And I tried really hard to get him to play ball before an indictment, and he just didn't think that anybody would figure out who he was. And he was wrong. Now he's indicted. Granted, he's in Russia and he's not been arrested, but if the political climate changes, he'll be one of the top people that they're after. If he ever leaves Russia, he'd be immediately arrested. He's been sanctioned, so most of his money has been confiscated. I mean, it's not the life that a lot of these guys portray, where it's this easy life full of riches. You know, he's got all this money that he couldn't touch and has been taken away, and everything he does is watched and monitored, and his face has been plastered all over the internet.
That didn't work out. But then there's the opposite story of that Nigerian fellow who was living in the Middle East high on the hog.
Yes, yeah. There's always going to be your different stories, but at the end of the day, if you end up in a living out of a cell, treated like crap every day, I don't think you're going to still say that it's worth it. But yeah, there's always going to be those stories, those people that get away with it, and that's why we have criminals, because there are ones that do get away with it. But when you get as big as some of these ransomware criminals get, and you get so much attention from so many governments, you're never going to be that person that has that story for the rest of your life, because there's always going to be someone looking for you, and it might take years, but eventually you're going to get caught. And you may not be in a prison, but if you can't touch the money, and you can't travel, you can't go anywhere, your family knows what you did, everybody knows what you did. Like, it's just not, it doesn't, to me, that does not sound like a great life. And you have these skills where you could do, to address what you said before, you could do legitimate business in the cybersecurity field, but these guys don't have those opportunities in Russia. They can't go get a job making $100,000 a year doing cybersecurity. So I just, to be fair, I got to put that out there. They don't have that option.
Well, I mean, it sounds like an opportunity if we were going to do something, but in the current political climate, I don't see that happening anytime soon. How much of this is state sponsored, John?
So to put an exact number on it's hard to say, but there is a large interest from, and I know this from my connections with criminals, there's a large interest from the FSB. So in other words, if they find out who the people are, they will pay them visits, they'll blackmail them, they'll force them to work for them. Sometimes they'll take percentages of the money that they extort, and sometimes they'll force them to help them with their cause, whatever it is, whether it's attacking the Ukraine or writing malware or whatever it might be. That happens regularly, and that's one of the things that weighs on my conscience is when it's somebody that I always have to do my job, and I always do. But it's hard sometimes with the feelings that you have when you like somebody, and you know that when you write this, it's going to put them on the radar of the FSB, and their life's about to change. I always do it. All the people that they hurt, they made those decisions, but I still, it'd be lying to you if I said like it didn't weigh on my conscience at least a little bit. But the day I don't do that is the day I would get out of this field. I will always try to, for lack of better words, avenge those that have been harmed by these guys that have no way of retribution. And that's what motivates me to take the risks that I take in the job that I do.
I always wonder if we're not doing the same things to
What do
the
you mean?
other.
Oh. Well, with ransomware, I'm not going to say that there's nobody in the United States that takes part in the ransomware operations, because we've had arrests. That certainly happens. It's not as prevalent, but there's plenty of other cyber crimes that we do. And then the government side, well, yeah, I don't think I even need to comment on that. Of course, we do lots of hacking operations. It's one of our weapons, if you will,
The Art of Cyber Warfare. What can you tell us about that? That's such a great title. That is
Thank you.
absolutely. It reminds me. I don't. Have you ever read David Sanger's book, The Perfect Weapon?
I have, yes.
It reminds. That's a great title too. That
It
was a
is.
good book. It was a very good book. But The Art of Cyber Warfare. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I wrote that book, I would say 90% of my career had been in chasing nation states involved with cyber espionage, and there is a little bit of ransomware in there, ransomware in there. There's one chapter, but the majority of that book, the first half of it, is nothing but stories, and let me tell you why. I've had a career where people would say, what does it matter who's behind the attack? Why do I care? Why do I need to know the attribution of the bad guys behind it? So the first half of the book is incidents where governments and major industries and companies didn't take it seriously when an advanced attacker was involved, and they paid dearly, because I wanted to drive home that point. This is why you need to care. But it also I'm a storyteller. I love to write and I love to tell stories. So it allowed me to write a book that had to be technical and teach people something, but where half of it is just really cool stories that anybody can pick up and read and enjoy. But then the second half, I teach you how to actually go and do not the human part, but the technical analysis of attributing advanced threats, doing the research, finding this stuff. And I'm not, some PhD or that MIT guy. A lot of this is self-taught. So I'm using a lot of freely available resources to do it. And so I wanted other people to see that, to sort of allow people that, even if it's just a hobby like it was once for me, to be able to do the same thing. I I just have to find the time. I want to write a book on ransomware and really get into sort of the human art of it as well, because I think that is a really good story to teach people as well, so that researchers can sort of put that in their tool belt also. But I'm not quite there yet, because I spend so much time writing in my day job. I mean, the 6 volumes of the Ransomware Diaries, most of them are 50 to 70 pages each. You put those all together, that's a book right there. But that will be something I eventually want to do, is write a book on ransomware and human intelligence.
Well, we would look forward to reading it if you ever
Thank you.
decide to do that project. Speaking of which, we are pretty much at the hour here, John. I also want to give you some time to go ahead and plug some things. You might have some new research and things coming out. Whatever you want to talk, let the audience know about.
Yeah, well, my book, like I said, I appreciate you bringing that up. I really think that's a really interesting book, even if you're not the most technical. I think that's something that people can really enjoy and get into, just from the storytelling aspect. I also have a report coming out. I kind of stole from the title of my book. It's called The Art of Attribution, where in my book, I wrote a whole chapter on attribution, and I used a use case that was played out perfectly to show you how everything fit. Well, that's not real world today. It's usually not that clean and easy. So I picked a really, really difficult current topic, Black Cat, the ransomware group, and some other groups that have similarities, and we apply that attribution framework. One of the biggest problems we have today with security researchers and companies is the take my word for it attribution. Oh, this group did it, and they're from this country, stuff like that. Show me the evidence. So I go through and I take some of these claims and I use a methodical, scientific, evidence backed approach that that I, again, wrote first in my book, and I apply it to that use case. So I'm excited about that. But I'm also in the process of, with some other researchers, talking to my publisher, of trying to get another book going. But that's just in the beginning phases, so it'll be a while for that.
So I have to ask you before you go, on the Sony attack, from what we understood, originally it was attributed to North Korea, but then it turned out that it was not North Korea.
That's not true. So it was North Korea. Sony's been attacked several times. And
Okay.
some the other, there's been, for example, there was last year, there was a group called Ransom VC that hacked Sony. They had gotten through development systems that had no customer data on it, but they were ingenious at marketing and got journalists to believe that, and they ran with that story. And there's been other, there was another one in between those two, but they did get hacked by North Korea. That part was true in 2014. It's just that there's been multiple incidents, and that's nothing against Sony. They actually spend a lot of money on their security since that North Korea thing, and they actually do a good job. It's just that anybody can be hacked. It's about how you handle it once you're hacked. And I got to say, I think Sony's a good company, and they handle those things well when they do happen. And I don't have any affiliation with them whatsoever. But I see
I
this
wanted
stuff
to get
all
the
day.
story. I wanted to know it because I know that was out there, and then I figured you might be the best person to enlighten us a little bit as to what really went down. But Jon, we are grateful for your time. Thank you so much. Don't be a stranger around here. You know, as new research comes out, please share with the audience. There's so much more we could get into. We just could barely do you justice.
Well, I enjoyed being on the show, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. So,
well, thank you, Jon. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.